How come TMZ had better tracking footage of this guy? What do I mean by tracking footage? It's like TMZ not only had the guy limping going to UVU, but also they had other video of the guy walking in the same direction at 8 a.m. that morning. We guess to scout where was the tent being set up and stuff. But this is proof that you have cameras everywhere and you could track Robinson not only inside EVU, the university.
When that step is skipped or presented in hand-wavy terms, people naturally suspect either incompetence or concealment. Then there's the matter that TMZ possessed tracking footage showing the suspect in public earlier that morning. Independent media outlets sometimes capture footage that official channels do not. That kind of third-party video can be valuable corroboration or a counterpoint to the official timeline. If TMZ or other outlets have tracking footage, the investigators should acquire and integrate those files into the case file, image them, and publish hash values to show that the files entered the evidentiary chain. Failure to account for or to incorporate third-party footage into the investigative record fosters the sense that authorities are selectively using or ignoring material that undermines their narrative. In addition, if independent outlets have footage that shows the suspect at a different time or place than officials initially stated, that discrepancy must be publicly reconciled. Otherwise, the public will assume the worst, that exculpatory footage exists but is being kept from view. Another puzzle is the shifting status of the boyfriend/roommate who was initially reported as cooperating and later described as laying low. Cooperating witnesses often change their level of engagement for many reasons: legal counsel, fear for safety, plea negotiations, or new instructions from prosecutors. But when the public record flips from cooperating to quiet without transparent explanation, it fuels rumor. If a person who was at the scene becomes unavailable for comment, the investigative agency should indicate whether that person's change in status is due to legal strategy, protective custody, or simply privacy concerns. In cases where witness cooperation is material, the investigative team can ask a court for limited disclosures that explain why cooperation has paused, without revealing sensitive details. Absent that, the public fills the void with speculation that friends and associates are being silenced or that key lines of inquiry are being shut. All of these perceived transparency failures combine into a broader erosion of public trust toward the FBI and other investigating bodies. Trust is fragile and easily broken. It is built on consistent practice. Preserve originals, document custody, show full, unedited records where possible, and explain any legitimate delay or redaction with procedural specificity. When agencies instead offer partial releases, selective screenshots, or ambiguous explanations, the public's default suspicion grows. That skepticism is not merely political posturing, it is a practical response to a pattern: missing footage, incomplete documentation, shifting narrative claims, and third-party evidence not clearly integrated into the official story. The cumulative effect is that many observers now suspect the publicly offered account may be incomplete or shaped prior to full forensic testing. Those observers furthermore suspect that Robinson did not act alone and that potential accomplices are plausible given the timeline gaps and missing surveillance. Reasonable people can differ on that conclusion, but the logic behind it is straightforward. If surveillance angles that would show multiple actors are absent or withheld, if phone pings are unclear, and if recovery footage for key items like the weapon is missing, then the hypothesis of a single shooter rests more on assertion than on fully visible corroboration. Investigators have the burden to either demonstrate the single-actor conclusion with full evidence or to leave the question openly contested until comprehensive records are produced. When the latter happens, public suspicion about additional involvement will continue and potentially complicate prosecutions. So, what would materially reduce public skepticism? The most direct remedy is the timely release of full surveillance footage, properly preserved and forensically imaged, accompanied by published chain-of-custody logs for physical evidence and device forensic reports for phones and other digital items. That's not necessarily a call for raw footage to be dumped on social media. There are privacy, sensitivity, and legal concerns, but it is a call for court-supervised disclosure to defense counsel and independent experts, with redacted public summaries to explain core findings and reconcile apparent discrepancies. Forensic transparency restores trust because it allows neutral experts to validate or contest the official narrative on a factual basis rather than through argument and rumor. Independent media and watchdogs play a role here too. When official channels delay or withhold, independent outlets sometimes surface footage and documents, prompting official re-examination. That dynamic can be healthy. It often forces agencies to reconcile and explain. But it is not a substitute for institutional transparency. Outside footage needs to be acquired, forensically preserved, and integrated into the official case file. Doing so avoids the adversarial optics of them versus us, and shows that investigators are taking all sources seriously. Finally, restoring trust is less about PR and more about verifiable process. Agencies should publish clear timelines that show when each piece of evidence was discovered, who handled it, when it was forensically imaged, and why any materials remain sealed. Where legitimate secrecy is needed, courts can review the sealed materials in camera and produce redacted summaries that satisfy the public interest. That judicial overlay gives legal legitimacy to any necessary confidentiality and demonstrates that the process is not ad hoc. In the absence of that rigorous approach, debate will continue to focus on what is missing rather than on what is proven. The case now rests on procedures as much as on facts. The absence of clear rooftop footage showing Robinson firing, the release of only screenshots, the lack of body cam and recovery footage, ambiguous identifications from low-quality images, sanitized messages without precise timestamps, confusing mobile ping explanations, third-party tracking footage, a shifting witness status, and the resulting erosion of trust. These are not merely technical complaints. They are the fault lines where public confidence either breaks or is repaired. The path to repair is straightforward. Secure originals, create forensic images, publish custody logs, allow independent experts access under judicial supervision, and provide clear, time-stamped reconciliations of any discrepancies. If investigators want the public to accept their conclusion, they must make it credible in the only way that matters, by showing the evidence, documenting its handling, and letting neutral examination test the story. Only then can suspicion be replaced by secure, shared understanding. A high-profile arrest, a patched-together public record, and a thread of missing footage have suddenly made trust in the investigation the story itself. If you want first-hand updates on this developing story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. The core of the problem is simple and urgent. Pieces of the investigative record that the public expects to see are missing, incomplete, or only partially explained. That gap is not just procedural hair-splitting. It shapes how people believe, or disbelieve, the official account. When surveillance clips, body cam evidence, clear timestamps, and straightforward forensic logs are withheld or presented in piecemeal fashion, the vacuum gets filled with speculation, anger, and suspicion. This report walks through the specific holes now at issue, what's reported missing, why that matters for reconstructing events, what standard investigative practice would look like, and what practical steps could restore confidence. I will not claim facts that have not been verified. I will show why the absence of certain materials is consequential and what investigators should do to address that gap. Start with the rooftop footage question. Multiple rooftop and venue camera angles should have had line of sight to the stage and the surrounding crowd. Those are the cameras people expect to produce clear, continuous video if a shooter fired from an elevated point. Yet, Observers note the striking absence of full footage that shows Robinson actually firing. Instead, authorities released screenshots and selected frames rather than the complete, uncut camera exports that would allow independent analysts to view motion, timing, and context across seconds and minutes. Why does that matter? A screenshot freezes a moment and can be cropped, compressed, or recompressed. An original camera export contains metadata, frame rates, precise timestamps, and sometimes embedded device logs that forensic teams use to verify authenticity and to synchronize multiple sources. Without full exports, independent experts cannot definitively confirm whether the frame is representative, whether it was altered, or whether other frames exist that show alternative movements or actors. In short, screenshots tell you what someone chose to show. Master files tell you what actually happened. Closely related is the problem that only screenshots were released publicly while full surveillance videos remain withheld. Screenshots can be useful for quick public updates, but they are poor substitutes for raw footage when the stakes are criminal prosecution and public trust. Raw video files allow forensic video analysts to do several key tasks: confirm that the clip is unedited, analyze motion blur and object trajectories, test for frame drops or interpolation artifacts, examine audio spectrums for corroborating gunfire spikes, and cross-sync multiple cameras to build a coherent timeline. When officials release only hand-picked frames, the public cannot see the continuity, what happened 1 second before and 1 second after the frame. That absence prevents meaningful public assessment of whether the posted image sits within an unbroken, consistent sequence or is an isolated snapshot, perhaps taken out of context. Releasing masters under court-supervised protective order is a standard way to balance privacy and public interest. Doing that would substantially reduce the suspicion that selective release created. Another grave omission concerns body cam and recovery footage documenting discovery and chain of custody for the rifle. In routine criminal investigations where a weapon is recovered, law enforcement protocols usually include body-worn camera footage of the approach to the scene, the handling and photographing of the weapon in place, and the immediate packaging and labeling of the item. Those recordings serve two purposes. They preserve an unbroken visual record of how an item was found and handled, and they protect investigators from later claims of evidence tampering. Without such footage, questions arise. When and where exactly was the rifle located? Who picked it up? What protective measures were taken to prevent contamination? And how was it documented before moving to secured evidence storage? Absent that contemporaneous visual record, the public and defense counsel are left to rely on written logs and testimony, which are necessary but far less persuasive than a video that shows the act and the protocol being followed. Compounding the transparency problem is the low quality of the images that were released and the way identifications were made. Families and the public were shown pixelated frames and were told that a family member identified the figure as the suspect. Making a positive ID from a low-resolution screenshot is difficult even for relatives who know the person well. Mistakes happen, and memory is vulnerable to suggestion. Identification under such conditions should be treated as provisional and corroborated through multiple independent means: higher resolution footage, gate analysis across multiple frames, comparison to known non-public footage of the person in comparable clothes, and forensic timestamp alignment. When a father's alleged ID is reported publicly based on ambiguous images, the moment is emotionally powerful, but it is not in itself ironclad evidence. That's why most serious investigations avoid building the public story on a single blurred frame. The judicial process requires stronger, multimodal corroboration before a single point of apparent identification becomes a centerpiece of the case. Sanitized text messages that were released add another wrinkle. They often lack precise timestamps and sometimes appear redacted or presented without accompanying headers showing source device and server metadata. Texts can be incredibly revealing when they include precise, server-side timestamps and are accompanied by device forensic images showing when messages were sent, received, and displayed. By contrast, sanitized screenshots can omit crucial context: whether a message was edited, whether it was forwarded, or whether the timestamp shown is device local rather than UTC or a master server time. That matters a great deal when reconstructing a crime timeline where minutes, even seconds, are crucial. Investigators commonly provide full export logs in Discovery that show message headers, server receipts, and IMSI or carrier routing data. Those exports allow experts to verify timing and to eliminate questions about later alteration. When only sanitized messages are shown publicly, the effect is the opposite. It undermines confidence that a full, auditable record exists. Mobile ping explanations have likewise been confusing or inconsistent. Investigators